State Circle is made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities and is made possible by the generous support of our members. Thank you.
Next on State Circle, another powerful politician sentenced to prison.
I've learned a lot of lessons. I've learned the lessons of how you make sure that what you intend to do, you get done.
Can new technology fix a technology-related road hazard?
If we can keep one family from feeling the way we do, then it's well worth it.
And closing a chapter for the state's historically black colleges.
A lot of the communities have lost the trust in the university system.
Connecting Marylanders to their government. This is State Circle.
Good evening. The big story around State Circle this week is 3 years. That is the sentence handed down in federal court for former Mayor and State Senator Catherine Pugh. Our Charles Robinson was in court when the sentence was announced.
None of this was intentional, what it turned out to be. And today I face the justice system.
There was no question former Baltimore Mayor Catherine Pugh is guilty. Federal prosecutors charged her with tax evasion and wire fraud. Her attorneys pled for leniency and produced a last-minute video for the court to view.
I've pled guilty. I'm sorry. I don't think I could say it. I don't know any other words that could be stronger. I'm so sorry.
The federal attorneys were having none of it. They asked the judge for the maximum time of 57 months laid out in the sentencing guidelines. The judge settled for 3 years.
You asked for more time. You only got 3 years. What's the message?
Well, as you say, the former Mayor Pugh was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison. And it is correct that my office asked for a longer term of years. I have enormous respect for Judge Chazanow, and hers is a difficult task. She had to weigh every single factor that is a sentence within the advisory guidelines range, and it should serve as a strong message, and I hope a deterrent to anyone in public life who is thinking about using their public office for personal gain and allowing greed to overcome their sworn duty to serve the interests of the public.
Writing letters on Pugh's behalf were a host of who's who in Baltimore's political circles. It included former Baltimore Mayor Kirk Schmoke.
In talking to her, she could almost not get through an entire sentence without crying. So I knew that meant that there were some very significant problems. But I think that she's better now, that there's some certainty as to what's going to happen over the next few years.
She's got to do 3 years. Hopefully she can establish herself and get out and serve, continue to serve the community. Knowing what I know about her, I'm sure that those are her plans. She's done a lot of good things for the city of Baltimore and Maryland, for that matter.
I've learned a lot of lessons. I've learned the lessons of how you make sure that what you intend to do, you get done. That you surround yourself with people, who don't want to serve you, but get the job done.
The former mayor agreed to restitution, but will also have to forfeit her home and campaign funds. The remaining Healthy Holly books will be destroyed.
And Charles tells us the former mayor will be back in court in April. That is to set a date for her to surrender. As the world steps up countermeasures to counter the Wuhan coronavirus, Maryland currently has 3 patients who are being tested. Governor Hogan and state health officials met at the Emergency Management Agency headquarters this week. There are currently no confirmed cases here in Maryland.
Based on the latest guidance from the CDC and our federal partners, we want our citizens to know that all levels of government are working together proactively and taking every possible precaution to respond to potential threats of public health.
The governor is asking lawmakers for $10 million in a supplemental budget. A hearing in Annapolis this week on a bill that could resolve through legislation a federal lawsuit against the state that has been going on for more than a decade. It involves disparities in the state's treatment of historically black colleges and universities. MPT Sue Copen says the bill, which is sponsored by House Speaker Adrian Jones, is the latest attempt to bring an end to this controversy.
Charlotte Wood was one of 12 kids in her family and never expected to go to college.
My parents had so many children, I knew they would not be able to afford to send me to school.
But this Coppin State University associate professor says thanks to good grades, athletic ability, and an HBCU scholarship, the impossible became possible.
I feel so passionate about the fact that I am having the opportunity to impact lives that may not otherwise be impacted if it were not for my opportunity when I was in an HBCU.
Maryland has 4 historically black colleges and universities: Bowie State, Coppin State, Morgan State, and the University of Maryland Eastern Shore. Their supporters turned out in force for the hearing, where it was standing room only.
The Speaker's bill calls for spending an additional $577 million over a 10-year period at the state's HBCUs. It's essentially the same amount requested by the coalition suing the state to settle the federal court case. The governor has countered with an offer of $200 million to settle the lawsuit.
House Bill 1260 would provide funds for us to build on our strengths in computer science, cybersecurity, business, nursing, and teacher education.
The additional funds would also be used to boost financial aid, increase faculty, and develop new programs at the 4 universities.
Our faculty are eager to develop innovative programs at the bachelor's, master's, and doctoral levels to meet the workforce needs. What's needed is the funding that this bill would provide to help us greatly enhance those programs and to start up new programs.
Bowie Mayor Timothy Adams, also an HBCU alum, told the lawmakers this was a chance to address the many concerns that have been raised.
A lot of the communities have lost the trust in the university system. Because of what has happened to our HBCUs, they question the commitment of the state to the HBCUs. This can be a defining moment for you.
Sue Copen for State Circle.
Lawmakers are considering a bill that would limit federal immigration officials from accessing Maryland driver's license photos. This in response to the news that the Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE agency, has been using facial recognition software to search the Maryland database of drivers.
I think it's a problem because, one, it presents a privacy concern. The facial recognition software is not perfect. We know that. There are also concerns that some of these types of software are more likely to have difficulty finding matches when it comes to minority groups, specifically African Americans, Asian Americans, Native Americans, and also women. They oftentimes are more.
Senator Lamb's bill would require a warrant for immigration searches. Governor Hogan opposes that bill. The plan to rebuild the state's 2 thoroughbred racetracks, well, it's getting closer to the finish line. The Budget and Tax Committee heard the Racing and Community Development Act this week. At a cost of $375 million, it would rebuild Pimlico and Laurel with the goal of keeping the Preakness Stakes here in Maryland.
The part that really excites me about this legislation is that it really is about, in my opinion, 3 communities. It's about the city of Baltimore, it's about Laurel, and it is about Bowie.
Linda Stronach had a conversation back at the Preakness last year, was can we stop pointing fingers at each other and can we start talking? And the goal of the conversation was to preserve the Preakness Stakes at Pimlico, number 1. Make sure that we're looking at this as more than just a race.
The plan also calls for community development. Texting while driving is already banned in Maryland, but lawmakers say too many people are ignoring that law, so they are considering cracking down on the dangerous habit with technology that is aimed at monitoring drivers, as our Nancy Yamada reports.
On April 7, 2012, I bent down to read a message from my mom.
And this was the result. Elizabeth Marks, then just 17 years old, drove under a flatbed tow truck while attempting to read a text message from her mom.
I had to relearn how to walk, talk, read, write, everything. I had to remember my parents, friends.
She had 16 surgeries and still suffers from memory loss and seizures. She and others whose lives have been forever altered by texting and distracted driving are hoping their stories will convince lawmakers in the Senate Judiciary Committee to move forward with a bill aimed at changing people's behavior.
Today, talking and texting on the phone is the leading cause of deaths among teenagers.
The bill will allow counties to implement distracted driver monitoring systems similar to red light cameras and speed cameras already in use in the state. If a driver is caught on video camera texting or using a handheld cell phone, that driver could later receive a citation in the mail and be fined up to $500.
What we did was we put a technology vehicle together to try to stop the distracted driving.
William Burley of Drive Safe Enforcement says should the bill pass, their vehicles with cameras mounted could be driven alongside drivers and capture video of people who are texting behind the wheel. He believes mobile monitoring is more effective than stationary cameras.
Just like anything, especially if you travel on 95, you see the toilet sitting there right behind us, the vehicle. Guess what everybody does? They slow down. They get on up the road, they speed back up. This unit runs anywhere, anytime, so you'll never know when it's there.
While no opponent showed up to testify against the bill, it has led to some questions about privacy and whether it's too much to allow cameras to capture what's happening inside your car.
If they observe another crime taking place on the camera while they film it, what happens?
Well, if he's an active officer, it would be up to him to make that decision whether to stop the vehicle or not, or have the vehicle stopped.
It's just a continuing overreach. I mean, that was the problem when we did the red light cameras were first, and then we did speed cameras, and now we're doing all these other cameras. You can come up with good excuses why we should do something or not, but at the end of the day, I think we're heading into, it reminds me of the book 1984 by Orwell. It's like an Orwellian nightmare where everything's on camera.
But for those who live with the pain of losing a loved one,
if we can keep one family from feeling the way we do, then it's well worth it.
Healing comes by using their voice and story to speak out. This is the crash caused by a texting driver that ended the life of Russell Hurd's 26-year-old daughter, Heather.
I'll never walk my daughter down the aisle on her wedding day. I'll never dance that special dance. And that's the whole point. We've got to keep dreams alive, and that's why we're here today.
I'm Nancy Yamada for State Circle.
Former Governor Bob Ehrlich was at the State House this week, joining with former Public Safety Secretary Stu Sims to honor Senate President Emeritus Mike Miller. Ehrlich and Sims are the honorary co-chairs of the Alliance for Justice Reform, which honored Miller for his service and involvement in Maryland's Justice Reinvestment Initiative.
And Senator Miller has been one of the ones over the years who has recognized that you do not lose your dignity simply because you have been convicted of a criminal offense.
But he was also very supportive of my efforts unilaterally as governor on pardons and commutations, things that past governors had not done. So he was always encouraging to me as well.
The Maryland Alliance for Justice Reform is an all-volunteer statewide organization whose work includes efforts to find alternatives to incarceration. For the Annapolis Face-Off this week, we're joined by Delegate Luke Clippinger, Democrat from Baltimore City, and Delegate Lauren Aricon, a Republican from Baltimore and Harford counties. Thanks to both of you for being with us.
Glad to be here.
Happy to be here.
Happy to have you. We want to talk about crime. Governor Hogan's Change Maryland organization came out with 2 new TV commercials today. One of them talking about the sales tax, but the other trying to rally support for his crime bills. Part of the text of that says Governor Hogan has a plan, strongly backed by city residents, crack down on illegal guns, hold judges accountable, put violent shooters behind bars, but legislators won't act. Again, that's what his ad says. Delegate Clippinger, you're chair of the Judiciary Committee. Your thoughts on those bills?
Well, we've had a number of hearings on several pieces of legislation, both in the governor's package and pieces of legislation that Democrats have introduced on witness intimidation. And in the next week, we're going to be talking a little bit more about lost and stolen guns and ways that we can attack the straw purchase of firearms. To say that we're not acting is not accurate. What's a little more accurate is that 30% of the people who have been involved with shootings, 30% of the people who have been victims of shootings have been under the jurisdiction of the Office of Parole and Probation. So if the governor is looking at somebody to blame for things, I think he needs to look inside his own house.
Delegate Arcon, there are no elected Republicans in Baltimore City, but there are in Baltimore County. How does this issue look from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, as most citizens know, crime doesn't stop at a jurisdictional line. So we do see a lot of crime that comes out of the city and into the county, and some of our crime is homegrown. I think the governor has great plans. I would love to see his bills get a vote. I do know that the parole and probation issue is a big one, but a lot of that is when parolees, repeat gun offenders, get caught with a gun, they get null pros, they get let go. So that's the real issue. So we want judges to come to the table, and they're not.
This idea of tracking judges has been proposed before. It's been a non-starter. What would be gained by seeing what sort of sentences individual judges are handing out?
I think what would be more helpful is actually taking a look from beginning to end for gun crime altogether. I don't know that looking specifically at what the judge decides to do at the end is relevant if we're not actually making arrests for people in the first place. And one of the challenges we have, and one of the bills that we're going to be hearing in the Judiciary Committee, is a bill that would look at how many times we're actually getting calls for service for gun crimes, how many times those have turned into arrests, how many times those arrests turn into charge, and then turn into convictions. We need to find out exactly why people are, why those charges aren't going forward, or why charges are being brought and they're not being sustained. We need to do that so that we can help our police officers better go after these criminals and better go after the people who are illegally using guns.
I would just say that even though I agree that we do have to do all the things that Delegate Klimpecher mentioned, the issue of transparency for the public is what's at stake, and what the governor's specific bill on judicial transparency is. This is public information. Decisions being made by judges on sentencing is public, and so why are we hiding it in the online forms when, if they went down to the courthouse, they could get it? An attorney who is paid $500 an hour has an easy time going down there and getting the info, but a regular citizen who works a 9 to 5 doesn't have access to it, and it's unfair.
The sentences that they receive are in fact online. They're placed on case search. They are available for people. The challenge is being able to take it from beginning to end and looking longitudinally, looking across different silos and gathering that information together so that we can get a true picture of why cases are being brought forward and why they're being dropped.
But the judges' names are what's missing, and that's what people deserve to know. Who's handing out the loose sentences?
You know, we're coming up on the 5-year anniversary of the death of Freddie Gray. 7 or 8 weeks away from that. That was the big turning point for Baltimore. The thing is, the crime numbers in Baltimore are not only really bad, they're really bad, and they're rapidly getting worse. I mean, the number of killings, number of shootings. Do you have anything that would make a difference this year?
I would say that we have several bills. The governor put in a bill, the Republican caucus put in a bill, 914. It seeks to make theft of a gun a felony. I think that's a no-brainer bill. I don't know why we haven't already done that, and I'd love to see that bill. You know, the hearing is on, I think, March the 1st, and I'd love to see people come down.
One of the challenges the Baltimore Police Department has had, and we are at our 48th homicide, and they've happened in neighborhoods not far from where I live in Baltimore. So it's an issue, and a critical issue, that is very, very important to me, and an issue that demands the urgency that we are hearing from across the political spectrum. I believe that we can do things here in Annapolis to make sure that resources are being well targeted, that we can bring people together to share intelligence, to start to look at groups of people, not just the victim of crime and the person who did the shooting, but also also look at the fancy legal word that people don't like me saying, the penumbra, the people who are in the immediate universe of those people. That requires cooperation across jurisdictional boundaries. And to be honest, there are good steps that are being taken to move us in that direction. There's good coordination that's starting to happen between the Baltimore Police Department and state and federal agencies. I think that we can do more to build stronger regional connections, and that's one of the bills that we'll be pushing forward to, and a bill that I think will see an impact this year.
We also need more police officers in the street. We're really running low. We have maybe 500 vacancies or somewhere in that range. And it concerns me that a lot of the topics down here are focused on spending $4 billion a year on education, and no more money is going to be going to increasing the rate of hiring in the city. If you want to spend money in the city somewhere that's really important to the community, I'd start there.
Of course, then when we do set aside money for things that are very, very important for police officers, including making sure they have good technology in their cars, it took forever to get the money out of the budget to actually put it on the street and get it where we need it to be. That's one of the challenges that helps make policing easier for police officers in Baltimore, and also make sure that we do what we need to do to meet constitutional standards.
Delegates, we're going to have to leave it there. Delegates Klippinger and Aricon, we appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we're back with a political roundtable right after this.
Can you tell us what you know?
Turning back now to the race for the White House.
The State Board of Elections voted Thursday to set up a new election.
It must be a very emotional day.
The world changed in the blink of an eye.
Children are at the heart of this story.
Back to the State House, where our Charles Robinson is joined by Steve Lash of the Daily Record for our roundtable segment. Gentlemen, let's talk about the idea of contested judicial elections, which one group of Maryland judges faces, and that's up for debate this year.
Steve, you wrote about this. It's not like judges don't get elected. They just don't want to fundraise all the time, do they?
Well, there are contested judicial elections. The circuit court level, a judge is appointed, but then can face a challenge from somebody who hasn't gone through the vetting process, a lawyer who can just challenge them for their seat. And the concern is primarily from Chief Judge Mary Ellen Barbera, Chief Judge of the Court of Appeals, that this politicizes the courtroom, which of course should be free of politics, so even the appearance of politics, lest the judges be seen as being unfair and not impartial.
It's a really interesting issue because historically there were a number of minority judges who got on the court in an era where few, if any, minorities were being appointed to the court, and they got on the court through the ballot box, diversifying the bench. In recent years, we've had some cases the other direction where some African-American judges lost their elections and were replaced by people who, as you said, weren't appointed by the governor. They just ran for the job. And historically, the position of the Legislative Black Caucus has been very important on this issue.
It has been, and one of the things I think, Steve, is important here is what the historical nature of this position. I'm reminded of Judge Billy Murphy, yes, who made it to the bench, and a lot of people didn't realize that he had votes in order to get him to that position.
Yes, in fact, Billy Murphy to this day is an opponent of, is in favor of contested judicial elections, and for the basic reason that ensures that minorities will have a chance to get on the bench. But Chief Judge Barbera contests that in this day and age that judges that there is diversity, that the governor seeks diversity. In fact, Mary Ellen Barbera is the first woman to head the Maryland's highest court, the Court of Appeals.
The fundraising
of, Governor O'Malley.
Steve, as you mentioned, the fundraising for these political races is problematic because, and I've seen on a calendar of fundraising events that a group of judges, tends to be the sitting judges in one county or another, running together as a group, but they're holding a fundraiser someplace, and the people who are supporting them, giving money to those campaigns, by and large, It's coming from the legal community, the same people who are going to be appearing in court before these judges.
That's always very sticky wicket, if you will, having the people who come before you actually pay for your fundraising to get you reelected. Steve, how do people deal with this?
Well, Chief Judge Barbera, again, she is the biggest opponent of contested judicial elections, is saying that that money does not belong in the courtroom, and that the fundraising from attorneys is the true black mark on contested elections.
Steve, you've written about a potential compromise on this.
Yes, it's basically what's called the 80% solution. That for the first time under a proposed constitutional amendment, that the circuit court judges would be nominated by the governor and then subject to confirmation by the Senate. And in that process, a judge who does not get 80% of the Senate vote, of the confirmation vote, gets at least 50%, but not 80%, would be subject to a could be challenged in a contested election. Whereas somebody who gets 80% or more of the vote would not be subject to a contested election and would be free and clear of having a challenger.
The 80% solution in the Sherlock Holmes bill. Well, yes. I don't think that was 80%. I just have time for a sentence on this, but Steve, on your legal beat, anything else you're following in the legislature?
Well, there's another proposed amendment that basically to rename the Maryland Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in the state, that the proposal to rename it the Supreme Court of Maryland. Making it clear that making it clear to even lay people that in fact this is the highest court in the state. Maryland has the distinction with New York of being the only states that have their highest court being called the Court of Appeals and not necessarily the Supreme Court.
Well, you can read Steve's reports at thedailyrecord.com. Gentlemen, thanks. Have a good weekend. Now, for all of us at MPT, I'm Jeff Salkin. Thanks for joining us, and have a good night.
This program was made by MPT to serve all of our diverse communities.
TV Worth Watching is supported by the members of MPT and by
71 acres in downtown Baltimore devoted to learning, discovery, care, and service. We train the professionals who secure the health, well-being, and just treatment of Maryland citizens. We create the knowledge that cures disease and strengthens communities across the state and around the world. UMB makes the world more just, more enlightened, healthier, and more humane. We are UMB.
What's your next move? Extend beyond your current position or make inroads into a new field through UMBC's professional master's programs and certificates in public policy, organizational psychology, entrepreneurship, and more. Our programs are founded on research principles and led by recognized faculty from government and private enterprise. Our community is committed to seeing our graduates drive positive change and translate policy into action. Claim your future at UMBC.
This is Pam Greer. Please join me for My Music